So we're in the 7th century now. And right from the very beginning, there are problems that started to cascade upon Islam with their Quran. Now, let's remind, I'm only looking for one Quran, one manuscript, dated from the mid-7th century, complete and unchanged. Those are the things I'm looking for, right? Let me repeat that again. One Quran from the 7th century, 114 surahs, and exactly word for word, letter for letter, there's the Quran I have in my hand right here. This green one right here. This is what I'm looking for. That's all you need to ask. That's all you need to find. That's all the Muslims need to come up with. That should be simple, right? Why? Well, according to their own traditions. Now, in order to know where the Quran was created, you need to go to Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, but mainly Al-Bukhari. And it's Al-Bukhari who writes down in volume 6, hadith number 509 and hadith number 10, how the Quran was put together. Let me remind you who Al-Bukhari is. That's Al-Bukhari over there in 870. Obviously, it's 200 years after the fact, and that's where he makes many mistakes. Because it's obviously, he's thinking the Quran that's at his time, at his period, in the late 9th century. And I'm even going to lie because I've said Al-Bukhari has nothing to do with the 9th century. He actually doesn't even begin to appear until the 12th century, another 300 years later as far as his extant manuscripts. And his manuscripts continued to be compiled up until the 15th century. So we don't know if there was an Al-Bukhari. I doubt if there was a man named Al-Bukhari. I don't think he wrote any of it. Or if he did, that's been destroyed and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten until finally they had the final copy, the narrative they wanted, and then they attributed it to Al-Bukhari. Okay? So, what does Al-Bukhari say? Now, let's just see what Al-Bukhari says. This is what he says. He says that Uthman dies in 632, and we see that in volume 6, hadith number 509, and that he has a recension that's there to begin with because Abu Bakr sent a bunch of men up to Yamama. And in the Battle of Yamama, a lot of those who had memorized the Quran died in the battle. So obviously a crisis appeared. And how many were in there? According to the traditions, 70 died. If 70 men die and that causes a crisis, that means not many more men knew the Quran. So we're talking about only 70 men died. That caused a huge crisis. When Muslims come to you and says, we don't need the manuscripts, we don't need written down, they all memorize it. Then say, why was there a crisis then in 632? Okay, you need to ask them that. It was such a crisis that they had to wake up Zayd ibn Thabit, who was the secretary of Muhammad, to come to the court there, and there was Abu Bakr and there was Umar. They're in the courtroom and in the throne room, and they say, we need you to write this book down. And he says, how can I do something that the Prophet had not done? They said, nonetheless, you must do it. So he finally relented, and then what did he do? He went to those who had memorized it. He went to stones and bones and pieces of bark, collecting what he could find. Stones, bones, pieces of bark? That's where the Quran came from? Do you see a problem here, folks? So obviously there was no Quran for him to go to. You're getting it from you, you get it from you, you get it from you. What if he missed? Oh, he did miss. He even says he missed one. And he had to go to a guy named Abu Khuzaimah to get one verse that he remembered, but he couldn't remember himself. Can you see? This is a polyglot of different sources to put together the Quran. That's in 632. What did they do with that Quran? Does anybody know what happened to that Quran? The 632 Quran? They gave it to someone. Guess who they gave it to? And who is Hafsa? Exactly, the daughter of Umar. They gave it to a woman, and what did she do with it, Emil? She stuck it under her bed. This is the only revelation that exists in written form, the greatest of all revelations, and she sticks it under her bed. Obviously, she didn't care about it. Can you see how stupid that sounds? Why didn't he make copies immediately and send them all over the Muslim world? It would have saved him an awful lot of time and energy, because then we know 20 years later, when Uthman finally comes to power, Uthman then realizes, he goes and sends another contingent of Muslims up to Azerbaijan to have the battle with Azerbaijanis. When they get up to Azerbaijan, Udaifa, who is the one that's in charge of the group, they come across some Iraqi Muslims and they come across some from Syria. They all come and they defeat the Azerbaijanis. They go to a mosque to pray, to talk about their victory. As they're praying, Udaifa hears these guys from Iraq and those guys from Syria reciting different Qurans, different verses. And he starts beating them up, and they go to blows. Bam, 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 bam. Udaifa back down to Medina. He is upset with what he has heard. He goes into the throne room. There is Uthman, and he says, we must stop this. We must therefore there are many Qurans up there. We must never have that happen together. We must rewrite the Quran in only one form. So what does Uthman do? Uthman takes that copy that was under the bed, right? That's been there for 20 years, that's been getting dust. He takes it out, blows the dust off, gives it back to Zayd ibn Thabit, the same man, and then he says, write it in the Qurayshi dialect. Okay, hold on a minute. Imam, help me here. Quraysh, if you're writing in a Qurayshi dialect, that means it has to be written in a different form than the other. What's wrong with that phrase right there? There was no pointing. There was no voweling. You can't have, in order to have a dialectical difference, you have to have vowelization. You have to have a dhamma, a kasra, and fatha. You can orally, yes, have different, of course, orally there are dialects, but not in a written form. In a written form, you have to have a dhamma, kasra, and fatha. Were there any dhamma, kasra, and fatha? Emma, why don't you come sit down here so I don't have to yell through everybody to get to you? This is the guy that knows everything, so we're going to have him sit right at the front.
No, I'm a disciple of James.
Yeah, but you've got gray hair. You're like me, so we're the same age. How old are you, by the way?
66.
I beat you by 5 years. Okay, so here you got a problem, folks. He's asked to bring Zayd ibn Thabit, wake him up after 20 years of being asleep, to rewrite it in a dialect that you can't even write it in, because you can't have it that early. In the 9th and 10th century, that would make sense. And that's when Bukhari is writing this down. See, Bukhari is writing this in 870. That would make sense in the 9th century, but not in the 7th century. So that's why you see, immediately there is error after error after error. And Muslim scholars aren't aware of this. We are. Just told us out a Muslim scholar, and they don't know what to do. They have no comeback on that. So this is what happens. Uthman then, okay, he gets it, he writes it, Zayd ibn Thabit writes it in the Qurayshi dialect, and then he sends it out to 5 cities. Mecca, Medina, Basra, Kufa, and Damascus. 2 are in Arabia, 2 are in Iraq, and 1 is in Syria, where the 3 circles are. And why does he do that? So that this would never happen again. There would not be any dialectical differences again. This is to standardize it, to make it codified, to make sure that there is no other Quran but one Quran. And this is the Quran that Zayd ibn Thabit wrote in the mid-7th century, 652. Hold on a minute. According to all the tradition, according to Al-Busahari himself, something begins to happen. Suddenly, there are other Qurans that started to come to the fore. Another Quran is written by a guy named Ubay ibn Ka'b, who is supposed to be one of the companions of the Prophet, and his Quran has 116 surahs. Folks, is that the same Quran? How many surahs are there in the Quran? 114, right? Just say yes to everything I say, okay? 114. So you got 2 extra surahs there. That's 2 too many. And then in Baghdad, another guy named Ibn Masud, he comes up and writes his another Quran. It has 110 surahs. It's missing 4 surahs. And then another Quran suddenly appears in Basra, written by Ibn Musa. It has 114 surah. Dr. Arthur Jeffrey went and looked at these 3 Qurans, looked at what the tradition said about these 3 Qurans, looking at the Hadith and looking at the Sirah and looking at the Tafsir, and he found 15,000 differences between these 3 Qurans and the one written by Zayd ibn Thabit from Mecca and Medina. Have you all heard this before? We're still in the 7th century yet. We haven't gotten to the most damaging material yet. Can you see, almost from the get-go, they were having problems with the Quran. These are not the same Qurans, and everything I'm telling you comes from Sahih Bukhari. I'm just staying within the traditions. Even though they may have been written in the 12th century, I'm still staying in there because that's where the Muslims are. So note, there were at least 5 Qurans in the 7th century from Medina, Mecca, Basra, Kufa, and Damascus. We do not even have one of them today. Stop and think that through. Show me one of those 5 Qurans. Why cannot they come up with one? We're talking about 5 different cities. None of those cities have been outside of Islamic control for 1,400 years. There have been no damages that we know of, no fires. There have been no floods. We don't know about any earthquakes that have happened. We know about no conquest for any of those 5 cities. Why can't they even come up with one of them? That's all I'm asking. One of those Uthmanic recensions. Not one. Not one. So now we get into the 8th century. Now we're getting to the stuff. Yeah, go ahead. You have a question. Yes, but we're not talking about 1,400 years. Now let's do this. That's a very good question. Okay, what was the Bible written on? What kind of material did they write on? Papyrus. What is papyrus? Interlocking leaves that are hammered down and flattened, which disintegrate within 100 years because they just crinkle in. That's why. So we would not expect to have anything that's 2,000 years old, except of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the only reason we have the Dead Sea Scrolls is because they were written, put in jars and put in caves below sea level, which is as dry as you can get, would not have been discovered had not that little shepherd boy been throwing rocks there from the Qumran community into those caves. That's the only papyrus that has lasted that long. So the New Testament was written on papyrus. But see, we do have some papyri. We have the Bodmer Papyrus. We have the John Rynan's manuscript in Manchester. And also the Bodmer Papyrus is there in Switzerland. Those are papyri. Those are from the 2nd century. We have the Chester Beatty manuscripts in Dublin. Those are from the 3rd century. But see, until we could get parchment, until we could get vellum on animal skins, all of this just could go away. And you know what happened in 300 AD, the Edict of Diocletian, he went and destroyed thousands of Bibles. So most of the Bibles were destroyed by 300. It was only when Constantine finally became emperor, finally was converted. When he converted, he then commissioned the Council of Nicaea, and he commissioned 50 of these manuscripts, and those were written on animal skins. That's called vellum, or that's called parchment. Once you get to vellum and parchment, you're talking about animal skins. Now you have durable material that would last till today. So yes, suddenly now these manuscripts start to appear. You have the Sinaiticus that's in London, the Vaticanus that's in Rome, the Alexandrinus that's in London. 2 of them in London from the 4th and 5th century, the Vaticanus that's in Rome. To compare those 3 Metropolitan Codas, they are exactly alike except for some punctuations. That's it. But see, that's on the kind of material that we have that's durable. So if we can come up with 3 complete Metropolitan Codices from the 4th and 5th century, why can't the Muslims come up with 5? Because remember, these are commissioned by the Caliph. The Caliph, therefore, would have used animal skins. He would not use papyrus. None of these would have been on papyrus. These are all on animal skin. So you cannot compare the two. It's not apples and apples in this case. They don't depend on papyrus. Nothing is written on papyrus, not in the 7th century. Everything is written on animal skin. So where is there one? That's all I'm asking. But let's get to the historical context. The historical context is what we're looking at now. So here you see, we're coming to the 8th century. Now, who said that this is not good, this is not some, you said, what about those who are not academics? What about the people on the street? Now we're going to help you, okay? Because by the 8th century, we now start to get a real problem, and that is this. Remember I said that the Quran in the 7th century only had 16 letters, consonantal letters. Oh, before I get into this. I do say it there, so let's just read it here. The Arabic which is used in the Quran today does not come from the Hijaz, from Mecca, Medina, but from much further north from Nabatea. And Nabatean Aramaic only has 16 letters, all right? But today we have 28 letters. So where did the other 12 come from? There's a reason for that. In 7th century Nabatean Aramaic, this caused a problem. No one could read what they were writing. They couldn't read it. So they had to do something about it very quickly. And they started adding dots and vowels. The dots were known as ijams, and the vowels are known as haraka. But here's the difficulty. So you over here, your name is Hafs, right? And you write the Hafs text. But you're living in Kufa, and you don't have any authority over you, and you take your dots, because by this time, now there are 5 dots that have been added. 1 above the letter, that makes it a noon. 2 above the letter makes it a ta or t. 3 above the letter makes it a tha or th. 1 below the letter makes it a ba or b. And then 2 makes it a ya, not ta, tha, ba, ya, right? You've got 5 dots at your disposal, and you've got 3 vowels, u, and e. So you decide to put your dots and your vowels where you want, all right? You're living in Kufa, but hold on, you're living in Cairo. Your name is Warsh. His name is Hafs, your name is Warsh. And you have your dots and your vowels when you never talk to each other. You decide you put your dots and vowels where you want to, right? And then you live in Mecca, Medina, and your name is Ibn Kathir, not the one who did the tafsir. You're the Ibn Kathir of the 8th century. And you decide to put your dots and vowels where you want to, because you're down in Arabia. However, you come along, and you are living in Kufa along with him, but you don't really get along with him, so you're not even in his school. So you put your dots when you vowels you want. And you decide to put your dots and vowels you, and you decide, in fact, everybody in this room, living in 5, 6 different cities, In Mecca, Medina, Basra, Kufa, and Damascus, and Cairo, those 6 cities, you all live in those 6 cities, you're putting your dots and your vowels where you want to. And your family are memorizing your Quran, your people in your group are memorizing your Quran, your whole people down in Mecca, Medina are memorizing your Quran, but nobody's talking to each other. So by the 10th century, there's not just you people, there are now 700 different Qurans, with their dots different and their vowels different. What are you going to do? You have a dilemma, don't you, on your hand? Because no one's bothered to look and open any of these. So therefore, the Caliph in the 6th century, before we get to that, let's just go look at these. The dots and vowels, again, let's look at these manuscripts. No dots there, no vowels, right? I showed you this earlier. No dots, no vowels. How many of you can read that? Can you read that, Emil?
Very difficult.
Very difficult, because it could be any kinds of letters. I mean, there's whole kinds of, this one right here, there's 3 letters right in a row. That could be almost 19 different words right there. So how would you read that? You can't. So here is what they did. Today there are 28 letters. This is a modern standard Arabic. But the Aleph doesn't need a dot. The Kaf doesn't need a dot. The Lam doesn't need a dot. The Mim doesn't need a dot. The Ha doesn't need a dot, nor the Waw. So those are the 6 that don't. The other 22 all need dots in order to distinguish them. So that's why you start with a smiley face. 1 dot is a na or an n. 2 dots is a ta, t. 3 dots is a ta, tha or th. And the other one is a ba at the bottom and ya at the bottom. So now you have 5 different letters, which if you put together with the 3 vowels, you have all kinds of delineation. There's the dhamma that's the u sound, the kasra that's the e sound, and the fatha that's the a. So u, e, a, the 3 vowels. But if you put them together, look at this here. Just putting 3 of them together, 3 little of those smiley faces, you get 19 different words, depending on where you put the dots and vowels. That was the dilemma. So in the 10th century, according to Shadi Nasr, who is the world authority on this, in the 10th century, there are roughly about 700 of these different Qurans. So Ibn Mujahid was given the responsibility to choose 7 of them. So who knows how he chose the 7? Anybody know? Out of the 700. What would you want him to do to choose the 7? What would you think you should do if you're talking about textual criticism? What would we do with the Bible if we're trying to stipulate which is the better or which is the worse? You'd open up the pages, right? And read the text, right? He didn't open up 1 page. Didn't read 1 verse, not 1 line. He didn't need to. So how did he choose these 7? Anybody know? Do you know, Emil? No. He looked to see who had the most students. Who had the most students? How many people were memorizing their revelation or their Quran? And these were the top 7. Nafi from Medina, Ibn Kathir from Mecca, Abu Amr from Basra, Ibn Amir from Damascus, Asim from Kufa, Hamza from Kufa, Al-Kisai from Kufa. Why Kufa? Because Kufa is where all the seminaries are. Kufa is where all the seminaries are for both the Jews and the Christians and, at this time, the Muslims. Because look at their death dates. So these are the 7. Now, according to Islamic tradition, when Muhammad was receiving the revelation from Jibril, other people were coming to listen to him from other parts of the Muslim world. This is what Islamic tradition tells us. And then when they were hearing what Muhammad was saying, their Arabic was not the same as him, and they could not understand what he was saying. So Muhammad goes to Jibril and says, could you recite it to me in 7 ahruf? 7 ahruf means 7 readings, which Muhammad did. So these are the 7. This is what the Muslims will say. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are the 7 that were there at Muhammad's side, listening it, and they were from 7 different areas, 7 different geographical areas, and so therefore they wrote it down. So take a look at the dates though. Nafi, 785. Ibn Kathir, 738. Abu Amr, 770. Ibn Amir, 736. You notice 745, 772. Did any of these men know Muhammad? Were they even living at the time of Muhammad? Can you see a problem here, folks? If you go to Wikipedia, you will see these names up there, but you won't see the dates. They keep the dates off. They don't want you to know the dates. I had to go and find and research every one of these dates. Notice, none of these guys knew Muhammad. None of them were anywhere near Muhammad. But here's the problem. Where is your 2 Qurans? I'm going to give them to you. This is yours, Hafs. And this is yours, Warsh. You're from Cairo, you're from Kufa, right? These are the Qurans you wrote. Do you recognize them? Just say yes.
Yes.
Yeah. These are your work. Give them a hand. These are the guys that wrote it. But are their names on that list?
I don't know if there is. So
Is their name on that list? It's not there, is it? And how many people now today, Awesome, he's from the line of Awesome. Yeah, that's right, you're getting to it. Hold on. So you are Hafs. How many people in the world today memorize his Quran? 93% of the world's population memorize his Quran. This is by far the most popular one. Has been made popular since 1924. For the last 100 years, they've gotten rid of as many as they could, and this is the one that they have chosen. How many people memorize yours? Because you are from Cairo. So all North Africans, about 3% who are all living in North Africa, memorize your Quran. These are the two most popular Qurans in the world today, right? Now you're saying, aren't they the same Quran? You would think, you would hope so, right? Hold on to that question. But notice their names are on this list. So there was a dilemma. And of course, by the 12th century then, you had 1194, Al-Shatibi was given responsibility to choose 2 from every one of those 7. So he came up with 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Bingo. Al-Shatibi died in 1194. Now we're in the 12th century. This is 500 years after Muhammad. They now choose another 14, 2 for each one of the students, each one of the Qiraat writers. How were they chosen? I told you just about 5 minutes ago. Popularity. Who had the most students? This guy right here, Asim Ibn al-Majud. Look on who is it? Asim, right? So he is the one, from his stable, he had to choose Shuba and Hafs. How many others were in your stable? You should know this answer because you are Asim. No, you don't remember? 91 students are in his stable. 91 others who had their own Qurans. All in Kufa. They were all in Kufa. That's just a small town. All of them were in Kufa, and only these 2 were chosen because you and Shuba had more students than all the rest. It was all to do with popularity. Oh, how about yours?
It's the best.
No, you're all alone. You're the only one. No one else in Cairo. So Shatibi realized that Nafi, he had plenty of those who came from Mecca and Basra and Damascus and Kufa, but he had nobody who came from Cairo. Yours was chosen simply because you were in a different city and they needed to have somebody from that city. That had nothing to do with popularity. It had to do with geography. Not opening one page or reading one line. Do you see how idiotic this sounds? That's not how you do textual criticism, folks. Yet that's exactly what messed up the Muslims, and that's why they're ruining the day that ever happened. So those are now 7 plus 14. How many do we have now? 21, right? Should we stop there? No, still not good enough. Because there's some other ones that are still missing. So in the 15th century, in 1429, Al-Jazari, who is considered to be the leading scholar, he wrote 80 different books just on the Qiraat. He was commissioned to choose another 3 with 6 students from those 3. So he chose these 3, Abu Ja'far, Yaqub al-Yamani, and Khalaf. Those are the Qiraats, with 2 students for each one of them. So that's another 6. So 7 plus 14 plus 3 plus 9. How many do you have now? 30 different Qurans. Look at their dates. They go all the way from 736 all the way to 905. That means they go from the 8th all the way up into the 10th century. They basically are being written over a 200-year period, none of which knew Muhammad, none of whom were in the same century Muhammad lived, none who ever heard Muhammad speak. Yet they all had Qurans from Muhammad. Isn't that interesting? 30 different Qurans. So, what would and let's just look at Hafs was the one that has been chosen as the most authoritative today, chosen in 1924. How many differences would you guess between the other 29 in Hafs? Well, our team has now been looking at it, and our team has now been unpacking it. Guess how many differences we have found? 93,000 different words, 93,000 different meanings, 93,000 different theologies, different doctrines, and different practices. In every case, every time you change a word, you change the sentence. When you change the sentence, you change the verse. When you change the verse, in some cases, it's not just one word, entire sections were missing and changed. Now, we've just been told by Dr. Shadi Nasser, who is the authority on this. He's working at Harvard University. He's on staff there. He's just told us we're even off. It's over 100,000 that he has found. And it's going to keep climbing as they find more. 100,000 different words between these 30. These are the ones that I have. I managed to get these. You can get these just go online. I got all mine online. You can buy them. The only two you need to do are these two here. Lift those two up, if you would, you two gentlemen. Huffs and Waters, if you lift yours bows up. How many do you think the difference you are between these two right here? How many would you want? Here's Huffs, that's Waters. 5,000 differences just between these two. 5,000 differences. That's why I take this with me everywhere, these two. That's all you need to take. Don't get all the other 30, but Hatun now has 37. Why do I say that? Well, Hatun, my dear colleague, who is only 5'2", was asked to go down to North Africa. And she was asked to go and do some training of some of the missionaries down there, and so she only speaks Turkish, doesn't speak Arabic. And when she got down there to Morocco, she realized that her students had never looked at a Quran. He said, how can you be engaging with Muslims if you don't know the Quran, if you not even have a Quran? She says, let me go get one. So she went into the nearest bookstore she could find. She asked the guy behind the counter, could you give me, please, an Arabic Quran? And he says, well, which one do you want? She says, what do you mean? Well, I have over here Hafs, I have Warsh, I have Qalun, I have Kisai, I have Ibn Kathir, and over here I have Qalun. I said, hold on a minute. I thought there was only one Quran. Remember, this is the daughter of an imam and has been told all her life there is only one Quran, not one word, not one letter, and even not one diacritical mark is different. How can you tell me now he just named off 6? She said, give them all to me. So she came, brought them back to London, and showed me them, and I started laughing. I thought these had all been destroyed back in 1924. And you'll see why when we get there. So she says, well, Jay, how many are there? I said, there should be about 30 of them. So she started sending people to Yemen and to Morocco and to Jordan. And she said, whenever you go into the marketplace, go to where the biggest mosque is, go back behind the mosque and ask for this Quran or that Quran or the other. By 2016, she came up with 26 of these Qurans. And so we decided, I said, well, listen, we can't keep this to ourselves. Let's take it down to Speaker's Corner. Speaker's Corner is the best place in the world because when you go to Speaker's Corner, the whole world can see it. So we decided to take these Qurans down to Speaker's Corner. So that happened in June of 2016. Notice the man on the side. That's Muhammad Hijab. He's known all over the internet. He has a following of about 500,000, 500,000. He was down at this corner that day because he knew that I was coming. He wanted to debate me. He stands about 6'8". Okay, so here he was. He was in the crowd filming me that day. He immediately goes outside, as you saw him there, and he's saying, come to me, come to me. Don't watch what they're showing you. Don't listen to what they're saying. I'll explain it for you. He will explain it for you. So these are the Qurans we showed that day. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Every one. I could go through the names. There's so many names. These are Hatun's Qurans. This is what she's been able to collect by 2016. All 26 of them. So the comeback that the Muslims will say, well, they don't change any meaning. There's no difference. Let's go through and see. I could go through 93,000. I'm not going to go through 93,000 today. Let's just use 4, okay? Just use a quick 4. These are the ones I like to use. There you have chapter 3, verse 146. And the translation is, and how many a prophet fought? But you have katala on the end because it's a dagger aleph. So how many a prophet fought with whom were many worshippers of the Lord? On the right side, it's kutila, and how many prophets were killed? So if you look here, you see a fata, 3 a'as. Over here, it becomes a dama, a kasra, and a fata. You notice they take the 2 fatas off, and they're the same consonants, but they change 2 vowels. So one is katala, the other one is, and if you notice here, it has a dagger aleph. You can't tell, but that's a long A. By taking off the dagger aleph and changing it, it changed from fought versus were killed. Now, significance, did the prophets simply fight, or were they killed? Now, if I were a prophet, I would rather fight than be killed, thank you, as the former survives. Can you see that changes the meaning completely, depending on where you put the vowels? Here's another one. This is chapter 43, verse 19. Now, in the Hafs, it says ibadu. So there you have a kasr at the bottom, but you also have a beam. And then you take the dot off and put it on top of the letter, and you take the dagger aleph off, and it becomes ana. So now it becomes inda instead of ibadu with the dagger aleph. So on the left, which is the Hafs, which is your Quran, it says, and they make the angels who are slaves of the beneficent females. On the right, the Inda, it says, and they make the angels who are in the presence of the beneficent females. So here are two problems. Are the angels slaves of Allah or simply in the presence of Allah? Problem number two, is it the slaves or those in Allah's presence who will be made females? If I were an angel, I would rather prefer to be in God's presence rather than his slave. And if I were an angel as a male, I would prefer if only the slaves were made females, thank you, not me. So you can see, coming and going, you've got all kinds of problems with that. Here's one, chapter 46, verse 15. You have Isana on the left, and then you have Al-Duris has Husnan on the left, and we have enjoined on man doing good to his parents on the right, and we have enjoined on man beauty to his parents. Now, listen, I have 3 sons. Are men supposed to be good, or are they supposed to be beautiful to your parents? I would rather they're good than being beautiful, thank you, good looking, because it makes more sense in that case. Now, this is probably one of the most damaging ones. This is chapter 98, verse 6, and it's talking about those of us who are in hell as the Al-Kitab. On the other one side is Bariyati, on the other side is Bariati. Indeed, they who disbelieved among the people of the Scripture and the polytheists will be in the fire of hell, abiding eternally therein. Those are the worst of creatures. That's what Huff says. That's what you say. But over here, what the water says, they would be the worst of the innocent. So here's the problem. Are we Christians the worst of creatures, or are we innocent? And what in the world, if we are innocent, what in the world are we doing in hell? So you can see that has theological importance, especially for those of us who are Christian, which all of us are. I'd like to know which it is. So there was a problem for Muhammad Hijab. He didn't know what to do. Obviously, he did not have an answer for all those people he pulled over. So back in June of 2020, he decided to ask the world's leading authority on this in the Muslim world, Dr. Yasir Qadhi. You've seen Yasir Qadhi earlier, who talked about how there's no difference, not one word, not one letter. He's the one that's been at the forefront of that every Quran is exactly the same, not one word, not one letter. And he has said that for years and years and years and years. And that's why everybody has followed him. And that's why he's so popular. He has over 500,000 followers on YouTube. So does Muhammad Hijab. But two completely different camps. Muhammad Hijab would be what I call a populist. He's on the internet. He's very good with a popular majority. He lives in London. I've engaged with him in about 4 or 5 debates. We debate all the time. And he's 6'8", so when I'm on the ladder, his head's next to mine. He doesn't even need a ladder, although he does. Yusuf Qadhi is not from London. He is from Houston, though he is a Pakistani. And he did his doctoral thesis on the Qiraat at Yale University in 1995. So he would be the world's leading authority on the Qiraat. At least we think, we are hoping. And that's why Muhammad Hijab went to it. Now, this was a YouTube interview, and I was called up to say, Jay, you need to watch this interview. I think there's going to be something interesting happen. So I watched it, and I quickly started recording it. He put out his hand, and here's what he did. At the very beginning, he put out his hand like this. And he said, Dr. Qadhi, this is a blank sheet of paper. Which Quran is the one that's from heaven? Which is the Quran that's eternal? Which is the one that was revealed to Muhammad? Which is the one that Uthman wrote? Before he could finish his sentence, Yasir Qadhi shut him down. Says, shut up. Do not ask me this question. We don't talk about this in public. Now, I can actually show this if you want to see the interview. I've got it on the computer. But let's hold off because we are running out of time. If you want, I can give it to you. Yasir Qadhi said, we do not talk about this. He said the Ahruf and the Qiraat are the most difficult topics for scholars today. He went on to say, you do not tell the new converts to Islam about the Qiraat. We don't even talk about it. Only with the most advanced scholars, the advanced converts, do you do a deep dive. He said, you can take my course, come afterwards, turn off the camera, let's not talk about it. You can do a deep dive with me, he said. He said the scholars in the last 1,000 years have not solved the problem of the Qiraat. Al-Shah al-Jazari, who was writing in the 15th century, died in 1429, wrote 80 different books on it and never came to a conclusion on it. He said the reason why we don't ask this question is because we have a respect for the Quran. And he held up the Quran like this. There are certain questions we do not ask of the Quran. We put a red line there. We don't go past that red line. Muhammad Hijab turns, oh, is that the crisis of knowledge, a crisis of faith that you had at Yale University? No. Not crisis of faith. He says, we don't ask certain questions, but at Yale, there are no red lines. You can ask any question you want. He said, it wasn't a crisis of faith, it was a crisis of knowledge that he had. Isn't that interesting, the distinction he's making? He said, you, Muhammad Hijab, you in the East, Your standard narrative has holes in it. Ooh, I love that. Your standard narrative has holes in it. Which narrative? Standard Islamic narrative. S-I-N. That's why we coined the phrase, because of this interview. Your standard Islamic narrative has holes in it, and that's why we're attacking the standard Islamic narrative. We're confronting it. We're actually attacking sin. Western academics, he says, have come leaps and bounds in the last 100 years, and they're looking at us, especially people like you, like the emperor with no clothes. He said, in 25 years, I've never lectured on this, nor will I ever lecture on this, except in my class. Come do a deep dive. Here he's been asked a simple question. Which one of these 30 are you going to put on my hand? This subject should never be brought up in public. He said, turn off the camera. Why did you ask this question? Don't ask me to say what should be written on the blank Musaf. That wasn't good enough for Muhammad Hijab. He said, this should be easy for you. You're the world's leading authority. He put his hand out a second time. He said, you've got to tell me, which Quran is it? This is 28 minutes later. You've got to tell me. Finally, Yasir Qadhi says, they're all the Quran. He says, you mean a little bit of Hafs, a little bit of, yes, a little bit of Hafs, a little bit of Warsh, a little bit of Qalun. You just mix them up and that's the Quran. I started clapping when I realized what he had just said. See, what he doesn't know is what we know. There are 93,000 differences between these two Qurans. Folks, the great thing about YouTube is this. YouTube lets you have comments at the bottom. So whenever I'm up there, I love to use YouTube because that's Speaker's Corner on the internet. And the comments are where you find out how people are reacting. And I get thousands of comments on my videos. And that's how I know where I'm weak. That's how I know where I'm strong. That's also how I know whether I'm being effective. And also I can see what countries they're from. I can see where they're watching it. And I can find all this information. But more than that, I can see how they're responding to what I'm saying. Well, I started looking at these comments on these two different sites because it was put up both on the Muhammad Hijab site and also on Yasir Qadhi's site. And I saw comment after comment. Yasir Qadhi, I have now left Islam. I have now left hundreds of people. I have now left Islam because of that interview. You have been telling us for years there's not one word, not one letter, that this is eternal, that it can only be eternal, and if it remains eternal, that nobody can change it. Not one man can change it, no word, not one letter. And now you're saying there's thousands of differences. I have left Islam and my blood is on your shoulders. Comment after comment, hundreds of these comments. They had to shut down the comments after 2 weeks. 2 months later, both Yasir Qadhi and Muhammad Hijab completely evicted those, or what do you call it, deleted that interview off of both their sites. And they've not been up there since 2020, but I have it. I have it right here in the computer. I can give it to you. You can all have it. Hatun has it. And every June 20th, I'm going to do it while we're here. What's the date today? I've already lost it. I have to go back and do it postponedly. Every June 20th, I put up a new video. And I remind the whole world. You remember that interview? June 8th. Did I say June 20th? June 8th, 2020. Remember what Yasir Qadhi admitted. They're all the Quran. He put it through the Quran and threw it under the bus. And it all happened because of one little girl, only 5'2". Can you see how what one woman can do? One woman who happened to find these Qurans in Yemen and in Jordan, these different Qurans in the different parts of the Muslim world. If one woman can do that much damage, that's why they're trying to kill her. They have to kill her because of what she has found.